Hare Krishna, welcome to our Sunday program, November 3rd, 2019. And this will be the second to last program coming from San Diego. So, reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we begin in Canto 1, Chapter 3, Text 32. The Sanskrit is Atat Param Yada Vyaktam Abhyudha Guna Bringhitam Adrishta Shuta Vastu Twat Sajivo Jat Punar Bhavaha. So these verses actually are a little complex, and this is reflected in the fact that the great commentators, such as H.D.Goswami, have very long commentaries. Often H.D.Goswami, Jiva-Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and of course Veera Raghava and Vijaya. These are the great commentators that Prabhupada also used, and of course there's some others. And so often they'll give, not purports in the way that Prabhupada did, in the sense of course, some of Prabhupada's purports are also short. Some of them are very long. Some of them go on for pages. The Sanskrit commentaries of the Acharyas tend to mostly clarify what words mean. If there's a particular word or a sentence which is not simple Sanskrit, or the words can be interpreted in different ways, or it's not clear what the reference is to, they'll simply clarify that. There's not very much what you'd call preaching in the Vaishnava commentaries. In that sense, Prabhupada's purports are, of course, for a different time, at a time when people actually don't understand Krishna consciousness. The Acharyas were writing their commentaries for a learned audience. First of all, an audience that knew Sanskrit, and second of all, an audience that was very interested in the Bhagavatam. So they tend to simply clarify what words mean and to show the logical sequence between one verse and another. How does this verse follow that verse, and so on and so forth, or what the point that Bhagavatam is really trying to make here, things like that. So again, their commentaries tend to be, in general, much shorter than Prabhupada's purports, but in this case, for this verse, we have long commentaries because it's this and the next few verses, and even the verse before this that we did last time. The verses are not, I don't want to say esoteric, but there are few words to say many things, and it's not always obvious what the point is. So you have to really look hard at it to understand exactly what it means. So just to give you the context, the last verse, the last two verses we did, 30 and 31, 30 said that Etad Rupam Bhagavato Hya Rupa Sachidatmana. It was talking about the universal form of Krishna, this form of the Lord, Etad Rupam Bhagavato, Hya Rupa Sachidatmana, the Lord who has no rupa, has no form, whose self is simply consciousness. And his body, his spiritual form is made of consciousness. Maya Gunaya Virachitam. This is a form, Etad Rupam. This form is Virachitam, constructed, built of, or built with Maya Gunaya, the modes of Maya. And so we're talking about the universal form, Mahadadi Vir, by the qualities of Maya, which are the Mahatattva and other related components. So we're talking about a form made of the Mahatattva, that's verse 30, Atmani, and all these things, but actually all these Maya qualities, and the Mahatattva and all these building materials actually exist within the Supreme Soul, Atmani. It's not his real form, but it's a form which is imagined or conceived of for those who cannot imagine anything beyond matter. And then the example is given in 31 of if we say that this universal form is actually Krishna, it is like saying that the sky is cloudy. And we know sky, which is the most subtle of the 5 material elements in Sanskrit, bhumir, apu, analo, vayu, kang. Kang or Nabas are different words for it, or Akasha. That sky is space itself. Actually, when the Bhagavatam says sky through these various Sanskrit words, it's really talking about space as a subtle material element. And to give an example of how space is actually an element, let us say, for example, that you and I are standing 10 feet apart, or for those of you who don't use that system, let's say 3 meters, approximately 3 meters apart, 3 or 4 meters apart. And let us say that we're in a vacuum chamber, or that we're in outer space. Let's say we're in outer space, there's no air, there's no oxygen, there's no atmosphere, and yet you and I, we can measure the distance. We're a mile apart or whatever. So if you can measure something, it exists. You can't measure something that doesn't exist. And so therefore, space itself is an element. In the modern world, the person that talked about space as an element that has its own influence on the universe, that was Einstein, of course. Einstein talked about the space-time continuum. So space is an element, but if you think about it, everything exists in space. In fact, the 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam says that the quality of space is that Chidra Datar Tvam. It is the quality of giving an opening or giving space to all things. So for example, if you say, I don't fit here, it means there's no space. If you say, let's say, I mean, because you can talk about something not fitting in a vacuum chamber where there's no air. So you don't need air to have space. But whatever you put in space, I mean, everything is in space in the material world, and yet space itself doesn't mix with it. I mean, think about it. Air, look at the other elements. Air mixes with things. If you have, for example, a particular object that is within air, you may get, for example, rust, or you may, because air is has oxygen, and it interacts with whatever is in it. So air itself interacts with whatever is in air. Or not speak of water. Water certainly interacts with everything. I mean, anything you put in water, the water will affect it. And of course, it will affect the water. And then you have fire. Just went out of order there. Air and fire. Fire obviously interacts. If you put something in fire, there's interaction. Or if you put something in the earth, there's interaction with the earth, with the elements of the earth. But things are in space, no interaction. That's why space is given here in the Bhagavatam, also at the beginning of chapter 9 of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, Maya tatavidang sarvam jagadavyaktavartina. He's saying that everything is in me, but I am not in them. Again, things are not in me. Yata kashastito nityam fire sarvatra gomahan. Just like the great air, the wind. When Krishna says, Yata kashastito nityam vayu sarvatra gomahan, the great vayu, he's really there, you could say, talking about the Earth's atmosphere. You could argue that the great air, or the great air is, of course, the atmosphere of the Earth. And so Krishna says that it's everywhere. This great air, as Krishna calls it, vayu or mahan, this great air, sarvatra go, it goes everywhere, it spreads everywhere. And yet it is within space, and it does not interact with space. Space contains everything. So in the same way, Krishna contains. So because of that, and so then of course Krishna also gave the example, just as we say that the sky is cloudy. It's really not. The cloud and the sky are completely different elements that don't interact. Or we say that the air is dusty, but really dust is separate from air. You still have pure air, oxygen molecules, then you have dust. So at a molecular level, they're different. So thus, so just as we impose dustiness on air, we impose cloudiness on sky, so we impose let's say, being the object of our sight on someone who's actually a subject themselves. And we went over that at length, I think, in the last class, that you are a subject, you are a conscious being, and yet someone that wants to exploit you, someone just sees you as a vote or as a source of money. I can sell you something, or as a sex object, or just someone wants you to praise them or like them. In other words, someone who for some psychological, physical, economic, social, political reason wants to use you, just sees you as an object of their satisfaction, but you're not an object of someone else's satisfaction. You are a subject of your own life. So these are the examples being given. This is serious philosophy. So that's where we left off. Now you know the context. So then in text 32, it says atat param, beyond this. So we're going to talk about, so beyond this means we're talking about something beyond matter. Atat param jada vyaktam, that which is unmanifest, avyuda guna, not necessarily beyond matter, but beyond what we just talked about, avyuda guna bringhitam, which literally is not developed by unmanifest qualities, or it is not developed by manifest qualities. So it's not just a product of the modes of nature. And so, in other words, this is a way it's sort of a transition from what we were talking about to get to something purely spiritual. So it says beyond this, what we just talked about, beyond this, there's something which is invisible. Prabhupada translates it unmanifested, avyakta, avyudha guna bringita, without formal shape. Prabhupada translated vyudha, without a formal shape developed by the modes of nature. So this is not a product of the modes of nature. And what we're going to be talking about here is the jiva. So here's the, not confusing, I mean, it's not confusing if you know what's going on, but if you're just a casual reader, it'd be confusing. And that is, the Bhagavatam is talking about all these avatars of Krishna. To put this in context, here's a list of all the avatars of Krishna, and actually there were 22. Well, there was actually 26, because there was a quadruple avatar, I think 4 Kumaras, and there was a double avatar, Narayan. But there were 22 in the list, of which there was one case of 4 and one case of 2. So however you want to number that. Anyway, after giving this list of avatars, then explaining that Krishna's too, Bhagavan Swayam, that actually, or however, Krishna is the Lord himself. Krishna is the original form of the absolute truth. And then making some general statements about all the avatars and the different categories and so on. Then we hear about the universal form. The universal form, of course, is sort of sui generis. In Latin, means it's in its own category, because it is not Krishna's real form. For example, we have a material body, and that's our body that we're running around in. Of course, we ultimately have a spiritual body. But the universal form, it's not that Krishna is actually doing things. It's not that in his universal form, it's not that, let's say the whole universe, well, that would be very difficult for the whole universe to incarnate on one planet. But Krishna doesn't, it's not like some big cosmos, some big universe that's running around doing things. So that's not really Krishna's form, that's the idea. And then some examples were given to show how we confuse consciousness, which is a subject. All manifestations of consciousness are persons. As William James, I believe, the early, one of the founders of modern psychology, he was an American, William James said that we have no experience or example of consciousness that doesn't belong to someone. So if we talk about consciousness, it's always someone's consciousness. It's personal. So the Bhagavatam now wants to explain that there are these avatars, there is the universal form, which is ultimately just an object of meditation rather than a really active, engaged form of Krishna. But then beyond this, there is something else which is not materially manifest. It's not materially constructed. Avyuta, guna bringita. Because in this world, as Krishna explains in the Gita, that everything is really built of these three modes of nature. Of course, the three modes take on objects. In other words, there are objects in goodness and passion and ignorance. And so all these objects, if you study the third canto of the Bhagavatam, Kapila's instructions, you find that the modes themselves, sort of as powerful forces, come into the universe. And then as Krishna says in the Gita, there is nothing in the universe that is not built of these modes of nature. So anything, any physical thing, any material object, in fact, is constructed through these modes. And therefore, to say something is beyond the modes is to say it's spiritual. And that's actually the word Krishna uses, compound word in Bhagavad Gita. Several times he uses the word gunatita. Guna means, of course, the qualities or modes of nature. Goodness, passion, and ignorance. Ati means beyond, and ita in Sanskrit means gone. If you know Spanish or Portuguese, you know the verb ir, which means to go, and the r is just the infinitive marker. The verb is actually e, and that's pure Sanskrit. E in Sanskrit means to go. So ita means gone. And so guna ati ita or gunatita means gone beyond the gunas. And that's how you say transcendental in the Bhagavad Gita, gunatita. So, so to say that something is beyond the modes is to say that it's transcendental, it's beyond, it's spiritual. So here we have adrishta ashruta vastutvat, that because this spiritual object is vastu, it's an object, that's where you get the word vastu, which is not architecture, it's simply a book that talks about objects and how to configure them, houses and so on. So, but vastu, the word vastu itself, not vastu with a long e, but vastu means simply an object, a real thing. And where is it in the beginning of the Bhagavatam? Vastavam vastu apta shivadam tapatrayon mulanam. So in the first verse of the Bhagavatam, the absolute truth is referred to as vastava vastu. Vastava, from the word, so if vastu means, let's say, a substance, and then vastava would mean substantial. So a substantial substance, it's very emphatic. And actually Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur took this term from the first verse of the Bhagavatam, vastava vastu, and uses it a lot in his Bhagavatam commentaries, that Krishna is the real reality, the substantial substance. And so here it said, adrishta ashruta vastutvat, because there is something which is a vastu, it's a real thing. It's a real thing, it's a vastu, but it is adrishta, unseen, and ashruta, unheard. And that is the jiva, sajivo. So the tricky part here is that we've gone from the incarnations of Krishna, or the avatars of Krishna, to the jiva. And in a sense, what we're getting here in the beta, different, abeta, non-different, we're getting the abeta here, because the logical sequence is, here's the list of avatars, Krishna's the original avatar, and then a few comments on them. There is another, in a sense, not manifestation, but another form of Krishna, which is more or less imagination. It's just an object of meditation rather than a real active form of Krishna. And the reason that's not really Krishna's form is because it's material. It's the universe, which is, it's all matter. And then, but beyond this, there is something which is not material, and that's the jiva. So in other words, the jiva here is connected to Krishna. Both Krishna and the jiva are not material. They are both pure spiritual beings, as Prabhupada explained so brilliantly. Qualitatively one, quantitatively different. So adrishta shruta vastu twat sajivo, that is the jiva, sajivo. Jat punar bhavaha, and yet that jiva is taking repeated births. The Sanskrit word bhava can mean being, or it can mean becoming. If you think of the English word become, it simply means come to be. And so bhava in Sanskrit can mean it can mean the material world. For example, bhava, like as Lord Chaitanya in the first Shikshastika says, bhava maha davagni nirvapanam, that Sri Krishna Sankirtan puts out the fire of bhava. It's very interesting because bhava really is a point of contact with, you could say, Buddhist philosophy. In Buddhist philosophy, their so-called void, shunya, doesn't mean, they don't mean, the Buddhists don't mean that there's actually nothing really exists. That's not the void they're talking about. So we should not go out into the world preaching that they're the voidists like the Buddhists that believe that nothing exists, because that's absolutely not what they believe. In fact, Buddha called his path the Madhyama, middle path. Are called the Madhyamakas, the people of the middle path, because they reject the idea that nothing actually exists. When they say void, what they rather mean, I mean, in that sense, they almost believe more in the world than the impersonalists, who just say it's all Maya. That's why the Shankara followers had a lot of heavy debates with the Buddhists, because the Buddhists say this world is here. However, you cannot, how should I put it? The world is devoid of, the world does not have any object which is just that thing itself. For example, take your body. At every moment, your body's changing, as we know. If you know anything about molecular biology or just even an ordinary anatomy or physiology, the body's constantly changing. You know, we eat, and of course, we're devotees, we really eat. But anyway, we eat, and we're constantly recreating the body. The body's constantly in a state of transformation. So therefore, this is the Buddhist point. You cannot show a body which is just that thing itself, because you could say, which body? It's changing at every moment. And as soon as you point to it, say, okay, let's just freeze the camera right now. But there is no freezing, because the change is going on continuously. And if you freeze the camera, that's not really your body, because your body is not frozen in time. Your body exists within time. And there is no actual body outside of material. There's no material body outside of material time. And therefore, even if you say, like, let's freeze the camera and just take the body right this second, that's not actually your body. That's just a picture you've taken. The real body never stops. And so this is Buddhism. It's interesting because this idea was not just the Buddha, it actually went around the world, because, for example, Heraclitus is a Greek philosopher, early Greek philosopher, that lived almost exactly the same time as Buddha. And so this idea definitely had come to Greece, because he expresses it, Heraclitus, the same idea of constant change, by saying that you cannot step in the same river twice. You cannot step in the same river twice. And the way I often express it is, you cannot breathe in the same body twice. You can't breathe twice in the same body. And so this is what they mean by void. But Krishna already said that. You know, Krishna got the scoop there, because in the Bhagavad Gita, I believe it's chapter 8, Krishna says, Adibhuta Ksharo Bhava, the governing principle of the material world is that everything is always in transformation. You know, every particular object is always perishing and something else arising. So this is what is meant by void, just so you know. This is what is meant by void. It does not mean that nothing exists. So that's the word bhava. And because bhava means, or has come to mean, I mean, it means literally, and also it's often used to mean in literature, becoming, and therefore it comes to mean the world of becoming. In other words, a world in which nothing just is what it is. A world in which everything at every moment is in the process of becoming something else. At every moment, everything is in the process of becoming something else. And therefore, because the word bhava means becoming, bhava also comes to mean just the material world. And that's the way Lord Chaitanya uses the word in his first Shikshastaka, bhava mahadavagni nirvapanam. That Sankirtan puts out the mahadavagni, the great forest fire. I mean, forest fires are never kind of a nice thing, but this is a great forest fire. This is a great forest fire. Mahadava, dava means forest, agni. Mahadavagni, and of course, it's in the Sangsara, Sangsara davanala lidalo. Davanala, anala is fire, same as agni. So davanala or davagni means the same thing. So Sangsara davanala lidaloka. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur actually paraphrases Lord Chaitanya in the first Samsara prayer, which is interesting. So, Bhava Mahadavagni, the great forest fire of Bhava, of a world in which nothing ever is itself. Everything is always becoming something else. And therefore, there's a type of, you could say, slow motion chaos, or slow motion because everything is, nothing is what it seems to be. It's becoming something else. And ultimately, of course, in the most personal way, our body, we think, well, if someone, hasn't really gotten into the Hare Krishna movement, they probably think that I am this body. And therefore, the fire, I mean, it's just like, it's, what do they say? Death by 1,000 pricks. It's like, instead of stabbing someone, you just do a little prick. And then, you just keep tiny little cuts. You finally kill the person, but it's a slow death. And so material world, what we call life, in a sense, is a sort of a slow dying process. And therefore, bhava, the world of becoming, is compared to a blazing forest fire. And so here, when this verse, chapter 1.3.32, the jiva, that jiva is subject to punar bhava, again becoming. So you're born in a body, that body is always becoming another body at every moment. Finally, the grand finale is what we call death. And then you become another, you don't become another body, but another false ego arises, another material body. So that's called punar, again bhava. You went through this whole ordeal, you went through this whole experience of a material life, and now it's going to happen again. That's called punar bhava, which is one of the ways in Sanskrit they say reincarnation, by the way. So sajivo jat punar bhava. So that's verse 32. And then what does the Bhagavatam say? So there's a solution. Now the Bhagavatam is going to say, that's the problem. Here's the solution. Yatra me sadasad rupe pratishidhe swasangvida avidya yatmani krite iti tad brahmadarshanam. So yatra means wherein, or a situation in which. So wherein, meaning this situation of punar bhava, we're somehow trapped in this material world. Lord Chaitanya says it's mahadavagni, it's a great forest fire. Vishwanath says samsara is the same thing. Samsara is just another word for punar bhava. It just means going around and around in this cycle of birth and death and rebirth. So yatra, so in that mess, in this situation that we're in, when, as Prabhupada translates yatra here, whenever, literally in which, sadasad rupe pratishidhe. For those who know a little Sanskrit, this is the, locket of absolute. So when the set asat, which Prabhupada translates gross and subtle, set asat literally means being and non-being. That's literally what the words mean, but they sometimes mean cause and effect, or here gross and subtle. So it's just one thing, one type of existing thing, sat, and then the opposite, asat. So yatre me sadasad rupe, when the sat and asat forms, which you can take to mean your physical body, your material mind, gross and subtle, or subtle and gross, Prabhupada translates it gross and subtle. So when these forms, pratishidhe, are nullified, are rejected, are canceled out, in other words, when you go beyond your physical identification with, in this case, identification with your physical body or your subtle mind, when you reject that false identification, how do you get the power to reject it? Swasambhida, by full self-knowledge. By full self-knowledge. Vit, of course, means to know. That's where you get the word Veda. Vit means to know. That's where we get English words like vision, video, wisdom, and things like that. And so, and Sang means, as you know, like in Sankirtan, Sang means together. So Sangvit means full knowledge, like it's all together, it's complete. In other words, Sang as a prefix in Sanskrit can mean together in the sense of complete, all together. And Swa, one's own. So by your own personal, complete understanding. When by that, by complete self-understanding, these subtle and gross material forms are rejected. Then, and these forms were avidyayatmani krite, they were created by ignorance in the self. In other words, within ourselves, these this material, gross and subtle, physical body and subtle mind, this material, false material identity, false ego, ahankara, is sort of built. It's created within us, in our minds, in our consciousness, by ignorance. And so, just as these false identifications are built by ignorance of vidyaya, they have to be overcome. They have to be nullified by full self-knowledge. Iti, thus, that, iti ta, thus, that is Brahma Darshanam. That is seeing the Absolute. That's what it means to see Brahma, the Absolute. And of course, in this case, we are Absolute. There can be Absolute in the sense of Krishna, God, the Absolute Truth. Absolute or Brahma can also refer to the Jiva in the sense that we are beyond the limitations of material time and space. So Absolute can also have that sense of just being beyond material limitations. But of course, we are small Brahma, and Krishna is the Parang Brahma, Supreme Brahman. So iti, thus, that is what it means to see the Absolute, or that is seeing the real truth. We have time for one more. Let's see. Okay, we'll do one more because this kind of is the end of a paragraph here. Yadyesha uparata devi maya vaisharadi mati sampanna eveti vidur mahimni sway mahiyate. Beautiful verse here. So yadi means if esha, that devi maya. In other words, if that Maya, Devi Maya, the goddess Maya, that divine illusion. Devi can also just mean divine. If that divine illusion, or if the goddess Maya, uparata, subsides. In other words, it stops. That's just a way of saying uparata in Sanskrit just means it stops. So if that illusion of Maya, if it stops, uparata, then you get vaisharadi mati. You get full consciousness. You get full mati, consciousness. The word visharada is, here I have a Sanskrit. I'll tell you, vaisharadi mati, for those of you who are looking at the verse, the word vaisharada, vaisharadi is just the feminine. It means experienced, skilled, expert, infallible, unerring. It makes no mistake. Profound. So you get this experienced, expert, infallible, mature consciousness when Maya stops. That's, in a sense, literally what is being said there. And so, so when Maya stops, then you get consciousness, awareness, or Prabhupada calls it enlightenment, full of knowledge. Mati, of course, is from the Sanskrit verb manas, man, which means to think, and then you get the word manas, mind. And from the, anyway, I won't go into all the grammar, how it becomes mati, although it's, grammarians like myself find it interesting. But the word mati is a synonym for manas. It means consciousness, mind, awareness. So when that happens, then sampanna eva iti vidur, then they know. Vidur means they know. And in Sanskrit, they often say things like that, like usually like vidur, they know, or ahur, they say. And so who is they? It just means people that know what they're talking about. Like it's common in Sanskrit, in the Gita, the Bhagavatam, you'll find it. You'll find the expression, they say that this is the way it is. They say. And so when you get that ahur, or they say, it means people that know what they're talking about. And so here it just says iti vidur, thus they know, which just means people who really know. They know that at that point the soul is sampanna eva, is actually successful or complete. Sampat means good fortune, success, and so sampanna means successful, actually complete. You've actually made it. It's just a way in Sanskrit of saying you made it. Now you're perfect, you're complete, you really got there. Sampanna eva, you really made it. You're really successful as a soul. Iti, they know that, people that know. And at that point, mahimni sway mahiyate. This is very interesting. All these words like mahimni and mahiyate, mahiyate is the verb, mahimni is the noun, but they all come, of course, they're different forms from the same root as maha. Maha means great. And so mahimni means like in one, and sway is from swa, in one's own greatness. In other words, in your own true glory, in your own true greatness. Mahiyate, you are exalted, you are magnified. And I say magnified because the word magna, magnificent, comes from the Sanskrit maha. You just change the H to a G, maha and magna, and you get Sanskrit. So the two words are related. And so literally you could say magnified, which magnified, of course, now in English is more like with a magnifying glass, but in older English, to magnify means just to glorify, to make great. So mahiyate. So then they know that then the soul is actually successful, has actually really made it, has become complete as a person. And at that point, the soul is magnified, mahiyate, is exalted, is made great in the soul's own greatness. That's why the mahimni mahiyate, it's a sort of poetic repetition of the same words from the same root, that the soul then is made great in the soul's own real greatness. So, very interesting discussion in the third chapter. We get the list of avatars. Then we're told that the Virat Rupa, because it's material, is not Krishna's real form. And the Bhagavatam then goes on, well, as long as we're talking about things that aren't really material, that's also the soul. The soul is also not really material. And then we get this whole discussion of how the soul is bewildered, how the soul is enlightened, very briefly. And when Maya stops and there is consciousness, which is complete, which is experienced, which is really wise, then, in other words, when you become Krishna conscious, then they know that the soul has become perfect. The soul has really become successful and is made great in the soul's own true greatness. These are beautiful verses in Sanskrit, and I've tried to give you some idea of the poetic power of these verses. So let me look very quickly and Hare Krishna, Govardhan. So let me see if there's any questions. If I don't answer your questions, if I don't see it, sometimes it's because it's Facebook's fault, because they don't give me all the comments. Facebook, in its foolishness, thinks that it knows what comments I'd rather see, and sometimes takes some of them out, which is why sometimes I don't see your comments. But I don't see any questions. So if you asked a question and I'm not seeing it, then that's the reason. It's not because I don't like you. It's because Facebook did it. Oh, here's one question. How to preach making Krishna the attraction to Krishna consciousness? You have to be attracted to Krishna. If you're attracted to Krishna, then you can make others attracted. Oh, here's a question. Let's see. With Kali Yuga becoming stronger, how can one become immunized from various asampradayic or unbonafide philosophies? Well, you take Prabhupada's books seriously. You know, read them and actually take them seriously. So, Buddhism. Could you discuss this a bit more in light of understanding Brahman? I tend to like to use kirtan as a metaphor for thinking of this. Krishna is one. We are the many, but we are all the kirtan. Krishna is all. Well, as you probably know, I like literal language, and so we're not technically kirtan. We are actually people that do kirtan. And what we can say, in deference to your metaphor, is that when we do kirtan, we realize our pure self. So in the process of kirtan, the process of glorifying Krishna, either by working for Krishna to glorify him, working for his movement, or by actually chanting, we realize ourselves through kirtan. So we'll do it that way. So thank you all very much. Hope to see you all next Sunday, which will very likely be the last class from good old San Diego. So, Hare Krishna.